Liberty Leading the People by Eugène Delacroix is probably one of the most popular representations of freedom. The painting shows Marion as a symbol for freedom leading a revolting group of people within the July Revolution of 1830, fighting against the Parisian military forces. Freedom is a concept that most of us are very familiar with. Most of the viewers of this video would probably agree that the French Revolution brought more freedom to the people, while something such as slavery strongly restricts freedom. We can also use the word when we speak about how we are feeling. In such contexts, we might say things such as, "I feel free when I'm at home or work or wherever." Furthermore, the notion of freedom can be a powerful ideological tool for criticizing certain social arrangements because of its normativity. Normative means that it contains ideas about the ethical legitimacy of something. Feeling free or not within certain situations, for example, can communicate ideas about the quality of such states and if they are a good or a bad thing. But while freedom is a concept that most of us are very familiar with, many of us would probably struggle to exactly define what it means. Similarly, within the philosophical tradition, there have been different approaches to define freedom that consequently lead to different theoretical scenarios of how a free society looks like. In this video, I'm going to give a short overview of this philosophical debate and review different theoretical conceptions of freedom. Imagine the following scenario. Someone is driving in a car. They reach an intersection and theoretically, they can drive whichever way they want. They can choose to drive left, right, or straight ahead. No one will hinder them from driving either way. They theoretically have free choice on wherever they want to drive. Would you consider this person to be free? Now imagine the same scenario where this person can theoretically still choose which way they want to go, but they choose to turn right because they need to go to their job that they don't actually really like to do, but somehow still keep going there every morning. Would you consider this person to be free now? The thought experiment distinguishes between two types of philosophical notions of freedom that political philosopher Isaiah Berlin defined as negative and positive liberty in his famous essay, Two Concepts of Liberty. By the way, the terms negative and positive do not refer to good or bad qualities as such that we use them in our everyday language. Instead, negative refers to the absence and positive refers to the presence of a quality. Accordingly, negative freedom means that an agent is not hindered by external obstacles in their actions. This refers to the theoretical possibility that the driver in our thought experiment has to drive whichever way they want to drive. There is an absence of external obstacles. No one is, theoretically, preventing them from going either way. Unless, for example, someone threatens them with a gun and forces them to drive to the left. Now their negative freedom is restricted. Berlin defines negative freedom as follows. I am normally set to be free to the degree to which no man or body of man interferes with my activity. Political liberty, in the sense, is simply the area within which a man can act unobstructed by others. If I am prevented by others from doing what I could otherwise do, I am to that degree unfree. An important thing to note is that negative freedom usually refers to the absence of obstacles that can be brought about by other agents. Natural obstacles, on the other hand, aren't seen as restrictions of negative freedom within Berlin's definition. But let's look at the positive freedom of our driver. To be positively free, according to Berlin, means that we are capable of making willful and autonomous decisions and act upon them. Positive freedom is the presence of a certain inner state of feeling free. Therefore, the driver isn't free as long as they don't willfully and autonomously drive to work. Berlin writes, "The positive sense of the word liberty derives from the wish on the part of the individual to be his own master. I wish my life and decisions to depend on myself, not on external forces of whatever kind. I wish to be a subject, not an object, to be moved by reasons, by conscious purposes which are my own, not by causes which affect me, as it were, from outside." Accordingly, positive freedom revolves around the internal capabilities of agents to self-determination. The conception of positive freedom is often linked to the philosophical discussion about autonomy, since both concepts are fairly synonymous in their definition. A central question as to if individuals are positively free is if they are willfully doing whatever they're doing. For the theoretical tradition of negative freedom, this usually doesn't matter. With a negative freedom, the focus are factors that are external to the agent. It is therefore theoretically conceivable that agents can have their negative freedom fully realized while being completely unfree in regards to a positive definition. If we, for example, imagine a person with godlike abilities with which they could take any possible external obstacles that others could possibly bring upon them away, they might still feel constrained within them. They might still have not realized what we call positive freedom, meaning that all these things they're doing are not autonomous. Within a strong negative definition, it doesn't really matter how we feel about doing something. What matters is that we could possibly do it without being obstructed by other agents. Now, as I've said in the introduction of the video, both conceptions of freedom are normative, hence providing a theoretical foundation for social critique. Both of them, however, also pose ideological dangers. Berlin, for example, criticizes the notion of positive freedom as a theoretical instrument of political legitimization because of the historical crimes that have been committed in the name of it. Positive freedom can imply certain ideals about how humans ought to live, and with that delegitimize certain other ways of living. Conceptions of positive freedom, therefore, can possibly justify authoritarian and totalitarian politics. Critics such as American philosopher John Christman, however, have argued that definitions of positive freedom that could be used to justify such ideological theories are too narrow. Accordingly, real positive freedom is content neutral, in that it doesn't matter how agents are living, but that they are self-determined and autonomous in whatever lifestyle they choose. Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor similarly says, in defense of positive freedom, that the content of how agents live their lives doesn't matter as long as they identify with it. But how does someone define when humans identify with something and when they don't? Taylor says that humans have certain subject-referring emotions that relate to the particular personality of different agents. He differentiates these from compulsive or irrational needs that someone doesn't really identify with. The desire to smoke, for example, for most people is not something that they wholeheartedly identify with. Smoking is usually not something that agents willfully identify with, but more of a compulsive urge. Therefore, for Taylor, positive freedom is realized if agents are capable to identify with the things they do as such that they emotionally matter for them and the personality they are. Taylor also points out a theoretical problem with negative freedom. Let me explain this by returning to our car thought experiment for a moment. Let's say that while our driver is riding the car, in front of them is another car that's driving really slowly. Technically, the person is being obstructed by that other person to get somewhere, so their negative freedom is restricted. But doesn't the fact that the driver sees this as an obstruction or not depend on how the driver interprets the situation? In fact, aren't most assumptions as to what we think obstructs us, apart from our physical well-being, based on our emotional evaluation of situations? In other words, if the driver doesn't perceive the driver in front of them as something that psychologically constrains them, aren't they still free? Similarly to Taylor, social philosopher Axel Honneth criticizes negative freedom as being arbitrary. Based on her German 18th century philosopher Hegel, Honneth argues that the notion of negative freedom is deficitary because it doesn't matter within this conception if agents are actually feeling free. While the notion of positive freedom certainly solves this problem, Honneth says that within Hegel's conception, freedom can never be fully realized without the inclusion of the participation of agents within social interactions. Therefore, according to Honneth, both of the traditional conceptions of freedom that Berlin differentiates are incomplete. According to Honneth, instead, a conception of freedom needs to take into account that freedom is only feasible within social contexts. He says that autonomy is not thinkable without the capability of agents to interpret their social environment as an objectification of their will. In fact, according to Honneth, inner coercions or constraints are the result of the incompatibility of our own motivations and goals with our social environment. Honneth writes, "Lack of coercion and freedom cannot be understood simply as the absence of external force or influence, but must rather signify the lack of inner barriers as well as psychological inhibitions and fears. But the second form of freedom is to be understood, to put it positively, as a form of trust directed inward, which gives individuals basic confidence in both the articulation of their needs and the exercise of their abilities. If we take Honneth's definition back to our car thought experiment, the driver only can be free if they can see their personal goals and aspirations to be objectified within the world around them. If we say that they don't identify with their job and are therefore unfree, identification refers to the fact that the social practices that are performed within their work life have no meaning within the context of their own goals and motivations. Hence, their own will is not objectified within their social environment. Social freedom is only realized through the possibility of a certain motivational coherence between agents and the social world around them. Honneth also calls this form of freedom objective freedom because individuals need to be able to situate themselves affirmatively within the social contexts they perceive as their objective reality. That means that the explicit and unexplicit norms that are underlying the institutions that are part of our social lives need to be an objectification of our own goals and motivations. Honneth says that if social freedom cannot be realized, social pathologies occur. According to Honneth, phenomena such as alienation or disintegration are results of restrictions of social freedom in which agents perceive their social environment as hostile, alien, or meaningless. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you did, as there will be more similar content released on this channel. I'd be interested to know which of the different notions of freedom I talked about in the video you find to be the most rational or meaningful, so feel free to leave me a comment to share your thoughts on this topic. And until next time, bye-bye.